And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And our guest this evening is Joan Bird from Montana. We'll be speaking to her, and it's going to be an interesting show. Before she comes on, we have Alejandro Rojas with the UFO Updates. And I want to thank you if you support the show. And if you can't support the show and you still want to listen to the whole show, you can do that for free. All you have to do is listen on podcastufo.com every Wednesday night at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same as New York City. Or you can also listen on PSN Radio. And also, the show plays in full on the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday at 10 to midnight. That's also Eastern Standard Time. And that's about it for me. How you doing, Alejandro?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Doing great. I think I have my wits more or less about me now, I think.
You do?
More or less, yeah.
Good. That's really good to hear because I've been waiting for that for years
now. A long time. Thanks, man.
Yeah, so we'll see. I'll test your wits out.
Uh-oh.
I'm not sure how to do that. I'm not familiar with wit tests. I'm sure there are some.
Well,
but
I'm sure glad I didn't give you any time to prepare. So.
And
I do want to say, a lot of these shows that we have to do are pre-recorded, simply because of your schedule. But I also want to tell the listener that I never edit. I don't care how many mistakes. So it's just like a live show.
You don't?
I really don't. I'm sorry about that.
I thought you did sometimes, because sometimes I remember you'll be like, oh, I'm going to edit that out, especially if I tease you or when I do the awkward pause thing or something.
No, I haven't.
So I'm glad you don't, because I don't either, because it's more fun when you don't.
Yeah. You don't edit your whole show with your guests as well.
Very little stuff. I do edit out, mistakes or buzzes or sounds here and there type of things. And sometimes I will lose my train of thought or something, and I'll have to do a little bit of editing. But not very much. I do very little editing, so it has a live feel. There was even something you said on my show, and I was like, oh, man, I'm going to have to edit that out now. And I didn't.
You forgot about it. Oh, dear. Wow.
But I should one day, because I've got them saved, all of the comments that you make after and before the show, put those on the air.
Oh, that's good. Like bloopers.
Yeah, but it would be, it would not be family friendly.
No. Oh, no. Uh-oh. Not safe for work. Yeah.
Yep.
So what's happening in the UFO world?
Oh, there's some stuff going down, buddy. Before I get to the good story, there's three stories I want to talk about. They're pretty good, but the third story is the good one, the great one. So just to build that anticipation and to make sure that you allow me the time to get to the third story. But this first one, this is kind of fun. This is a video, another story from Roger Marsh, the director of the Mutual UFO Network, director of communications for the Mutual UFO Network, who also writes for us, and he writes about MUFON cases. He wrote about this video, and it's a video that this college kid took. He goes to Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania, and one evening at about 10:27, he said he was, he was inside doing his homework when he noticed something outside, a light. And he videotaped it. Now, he videoed through the window. So, as people have noted, there's kind of some, it's hard to make determinations because there will be some distortion. And, you can't make a whole lot out of this video. It's just a point of light kind of out there. You can't tell for sure what it is. But this is what's interesting, and is that this person, having seen this thing, has this theory, this student. He says, I actually have a theory. Here's the quote. I hypothesize that mathematically this type of dimensional projection can be explained by mapping from a four-dimensional vector plane, which is their reality, onto a three-dimensional vector plane, which is our reality, linear algebra transformations. This would allow an orb of possibly a higher dimension to travel to lower dimensions and be visible to us three-dimensional creatures.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
I wonder what he's studying. Wow,
Yeah.
That is really interesting. And, there is talk in the UFO community. People do talk about possibly other dimensions and stuff like that. So it's really interesting when you hear people that are outside of the UFO community come up with an idea. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. What homework was he doing? He must have been doing his math homework, but that was kind of cool. So you have to check out the video. It's interesting, and, I can't say for sure what it is. People like Mark D'Antonio are looking into it, but it is hampered by going through the window there. But, interesting theory, huh?
Yeah, it is. It is. Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope it's not one of these things where it's some type of light like we've seen so many times, flashing.
Well, there is. You haven't. You might not have seen the video yet, but there is something that gives me a little bit of concern, and I don't know what would explain this. Is that as the object moves in the video, if you zoom in and when you take the stills, you can see this kind of lighter area around the area it's moving in. And it doesn't move out of this kind of slightly, lighter than the background kind of area just around it. And that's really weird to me. So I don't know what that would be.
Okay, I'm watching it now, and I see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have any
ideas?
ideas?
Concerning. That's almost like something coming in from the back of the glass or something.
That's what I thought.
An interior light or some type of light source.
Yeah. And I thought maybe this elaborate hypothesis could be a hoax, that this person's just being funny, because it would be a bit of dry humor, but it would be someone like I would appreciate.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a tough one, but I see exactly what you're talking about. It's like a light tone nearby.
Exactly.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I would like to hear what Mark D'Antonio has to say about it. However, the light does look like it's out somewhere, and there is a couple of flashes on it, too.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure it is inside a reflection, because it is a bright point of light.
Yeah, wow.
I don't know what the heck's going on here.
And the guy had me at hypothesize.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I love the hypothesization.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have a section for your hypothesis as to the nature, mathematical or otherwise, of the phenomena you witnessed. Another interesting video that we posted, and it's one of our social media videos. I love these. I think it's awesome. Michael Klein, our video guy, puts these together. He goes through our photo archives, and sometimes he finds some photos that aren't well known. I don't think people know about these photos that we posted. So he creates these little videos, and then we upload them on Twitter and on Facebook, so they play, embedded in those. We also put it on YouTube, and we make a story. But this is a fun one. These are some photos from Mexico, Cocoyoc, Mexico, from 1973, November 3rd, where four people were traveling north to Mexico City, and they inside the car, they saw this weird object. They thought it was a helicopter, but then it looked weird. They stopped, got out of their car. This guy had a camera. He started taking pictures with his 50 millimeter lens, and then he changed to a telephoto 135 millimeter lens to get pictures of this weird object. And they said this object kind of landed, and then they got freaked out, and they took off. essentially. And this was looked at by a director for Kodak out in Mexico, and he didn't find any evidence of a fraud, but it's kind of a teardrop, inverted teardrop, kind of almost looking balloon type thing with these tentacles around it. You would think maybe it is a hot air balloon. Mm-hmm. In particular, I think it's the Purple People Eater hot air balloon. You can look that up if you haven't seen it. It's kind of similar to this. But there's no carriage or anything underneath it. So it's a really weird pictures. And, of course, this is before the time of Photoshop. So you have to check that out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I like the video that you did on that as well. Yeah, it looks sort of octopi-like.
Octopi. It is flying space octopi.
Yeah. Huh. Wow.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And it does, I would, if someone asked me to guess, which actually no one's asking me to guess, but I would say that it does look like a balloon, not necessarily a hot air balloon, only by the way it's shaped at the bottom of it and everything. But I would say that it looks like it could be some type of, like a parade balloon or something. Something very strange, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's weird stuff. Really weird.
Okay, let's hear the big one.
The big one. I'm glad you asked. So this is really cool. Some of you who follow UFO news, it's only been the last few days that this has kind of been out there. But a few days ago, the National Police Air Services in St. Athan, Wales, posted a video. It's reminiscent of the Puerto Rico FLIR video. It's this FLIR video that they got from the police helicopter of this object that they couldn't see with their eyes or with a normal camera, only with FLIR. Now, it was nighttime, but you see this round object in the film. What's cool about this is that they tweeted it, and they tweeted the video. At least it's only it's a minute and 15 seconds. They say the entire video was 7 minutes, but they post and it actually is a video. It looks like one of the guys maybe took his phone and was filming the screen as it was playing, so he could tweet, a minute and 15 of this. Mm-hmm. And they say, and this is their official, police air services Twitter, they post any suggestion, nothing seen by local ATC, and they put a little alien face and some question marks. So people are like, wow, that's kind of weird, a couple of people said, well, could it be a balloon or something like that? And they said, well, the problem with that is it seemed to be going against the wind, and it's too hot because, of course, the FLIR registers heat. It's seeing the heat of this object, not like our eyes see. So because this is dark, it's some kind of hot object, which is weird. So they said, Chinese lantern. Well, they would have seen a Chinese lantern, but they couldn't see it with their eyes. In fact, they replied here, particularly to the balloon, only slight problem is the amount of heat, and it was traveling into the wind, ? They then said, they laughed and they said, a balloon with an engine and central heating. So this happened, they said, on Saturday, which would have been not this past Saturday, but the Saturday prior at 21:30 hours. And it was over the Bristol Channel, they said, at approximately 1,000 feet. So I'm writing the story on this right now. That's about all they said. Because it's only on this Twitter, and it's getting news out there, especially in the UK, but it's starting to kind of leak over here. So I have a FLIR expert connection, and this is through the Puerto Rico video. Some of you may remember that I interviewed a FLIR expert to see what his thoughts were. And he commented on this, and I'm writing the story with his comments. He agrees that it's weird. He says you can definitely rule out a balloon or a bird. He doesn't think it was a Chinese lantern. He disagrees a bit in that he thinks, which is still strange, he thinks that the object is stationary. Of course, it looks like it's moving, but like Mark D'Antonio has pointed out, when a helicopter or plane is flying around an object, the background is moving, but it doesn't mean the object is.
Right.
So this guy is an expert on this exact type of system. And he's like, this is funny because I work on these systems on a regular basis. And he says this is weird. He doesn't know what it is. He can't figure it out at all. He thinks it's strange, too, which is interesting because those air services police probably look at these videos a lot, just like Dave, the expert I am talking to, also looked at them. So this is really mysterious. So I'm actually writing this story now. I'll have it up. I'll probably have it up by the time the show airs so people can see it on our front page. But you'll have to check out this video. Have you seen it yet?
No, I have not. You did?
Okay.
Yeah. Is it available on YouTube as well?
I don't believe so. I wouldn't doubt if by now someone hasn't uploaded it to YouTube, but I'll have it embedded in our story momentarily. And actually, if you just look NPAS St. Athen, you'll be able to find it because those are the people who posted it.
Wow, excellent. Okay, so you can find all these stories we talked about on openminds.tv, as well as a link in our show notes. And speaking of our show notes, we have our guest, Joan Bird, who's coming up. We have her full bio right in our show notes.
Dr. Joan Bird, even.
Yes, I was going to say she got her PhD in West Indian finches, which is interesting. So she's from Montana, and she has studied zoology, and she has a great book called Montana UFOs and Extraterrestrials. And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about her interview with some sheriffs in Montana and a lot more coming up. Thanks so much, Alejandro. We'll be talking to you next week.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Hang in, everyone. We'll be right back after the quick music break with Joan Bird. Well, hello, Joan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you. We actually met out in Phoenix. I think it was it last year or the year before? Time's slipping away.
Wait, I'm sorry, but you'll not be able to get me to remember what year it was. They kind of blur together after a while.
Oh, God, I'm not alone. Anyway, I had someone that helps out with the show. Peggy, she helps out with our Facebook page, posting every single day. She either read your book or something when it came out. I think it was in 2012, and you and I had just kept missing each other, and finally, hurrah, here you are.
Good. Yes. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of flurry of activity after the book came out, and there was only so much I could deal with at a time. So lately, things have slowed down a little bit. Although I'm still doing a fair amount of speaking and enjoying speaking around the state. Oh. So anyway, I try to keep it to a dull roar. I just
yeah. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit later is one of the most fantastic UFO pieces of footage in Montana around the water tower. I've seen that. I've looked at that for a number of years, and I want to talk about that. But before we get into anything, if you would, can you tell the listener who's not familiar with who you are, how you got interested in this subject and your background and all that, if you would?
All right. I'll try not to take too much time here.
We have plenty of time.
Okay. Well, yes, I am a scientist by training, and I was very interested in animals and in ecology and in animal behavior. So that was what my degree was basically in. But I did work on birds, on inter-island variation in birds, so I'm steeped in orthodox evolutionary theory and ecological theory. That was my background. I say to some people I'm still recovering from it. Mm-hmm. But that is my background, and I come from a family with a lot of respect for science. My father was an aeronautical engineer, and I have a brother who is a physicist. And so in my family, if you wanted to amount to anything, you needed to be a scientist. That was, these were the people that were taking us forward. So that was part of my initial endeavor to stay in the science field, even though I had more of an interest in nature and the outdoors, and in the end was more interested in being, I guess, kind of a conservation activist than I was in being an academic. But it was good training, and it gives me a good ability to assess the validity of things and to think critically, and I'm very grateful for that. And it also enabled me to be able to speak science, and that is helpful in communicating with people that come from that realm. So I have always been interested in things that are unexplained, and as I say in my book, part of the reason for that is that my mother was a near-death experiencer, and she had this experience when I was 13 and told me about it a couple of months after it happened, when she got better from closed heart surgery, which had a 50% survival rate back in 1962 when that happened. So I just knew that there were things out there that our current understanding of a materialistic universe did not explain, that divide between spirit and matter. So I always kind of kept track of those things that didn't quite fit.
Would you mind, I know this is a show about UFOs, but would you mind just briefly going into what your mother did experience?
Okay. No, I don't mind. I enjoy sharing it. And I have to say that whenever she did share it, it was so moving to her that it always brought tears. And I don't know why this is, but that often happens to me too when I talk about it. Mm-hmm. Her mother had died 6 months previously, and so she experienced a tunnel and a light at the end of the tunnel, and traveling down this tunnel. And mind you, this was long before Moody's Life After Life came out. Mm-hmm. I had never heard of anything like this. Neither had she. When she came to the other end of the tunnel, she came into this place with this brilliant light. Her mother met her. She talked about seeing another figure that she didn't know. She said, maybe it's Jesus, I don't know. But there was this luminous figure there, and she said, I have never felt so completely immersed in love. And the music was incredibly beautiful. She said, I have never felt so loved and so at peace, and I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there, but I knew that you and your sister needed me. So I decided that it wasn't time for me to go. Wow.
It's really interesting. I said this is a show about UFOs, but I've heard of so many of these accounts that it is just more of the unexplained, and I could definitely see why that sparked your interest. So how did it jump over to? Was UFOs just part of these things you were looking into?
Well, it was actually the crop circles that kind of got my attention. I've been working in conservation for a number of years and was starting to do more writing, and I had just gotten wind that there'd been these crop circles that had happened up in northwestern Montana near Kalispell, between Kalispell and Whitefish. And I'd cut out a newspaper article. Actually, it was just a photo, nothing more, and it didn't really show. It wasn't not an aerial photo, so you couldn't really see any shape of the crop circle. But I was talking to a friend of mine who was a magazine publisher, and she said, well, if you write an article on that, then I'd probably publish it. Well, that'd be interesting to research. So I started looking into this, and this was in early 1999, and that first crop circle, I am relatively sure was man-made. I wasn't able to see it when it happened. It happened in August, and I don't think I saw the newspaper article until September, and it was long gone by then. It had been harvested. But when I spoke with the reporters and also the farmer, whom I happened to know because I had done environmental work up in the Flathead and had worked with a lot of the farmers about preservation of ag land and things like that, I talked to him about it, and he said, he just thought it was pranksters. And there was a lot of evidence pointing in that direction. Mm-hmm. But in the next year, in August of 1999, there was another crop circle that formed about 5 miles from that initial one. And by that time, a number of us had become aware of the BLT research team, the crop circle research team, mm-hmm. and the analysis that they were doing on mm-hmm. plants and the electromagnetic anomalies that they were experiencing in the crop circles. So there were people on the ground who were able to get plant samples from that 1999 crop circle that showed some of the anomalies that Nancy Talbot had told us about. Mm-hmm. And also they experienced some of those failures of cameras, dead batteries, compasses going wacky, all of those kinds of things in the second crop circle. And it was very similar to the first crop circle, but with some differences that almost like it was a reply. And I know that sometimes happens, and I had been learning that in looking at the crop circle phenomenon, it's important to know what was in that field the year before and what else is happening in other fields around it. You can't look at just one crop circle by itself. And in fact, in my book, I called it Cereal Mystery, with because it's usually in cereal crops, but also because you have to look at what, there's often the rest of the story comes later. So, so that looked to me like it was a commentary on the first one. And then the following year, there were 2 crop circles that happened within 2 weeks' time in the same field. And again, the electromagnetic anomalies, the same kinds of changes in the plant structure that made us believe that those were at least not man-made. Something else was doing them and we didn't know what. And I was fascinated by what I was learning online about the crop circles in England and paying a lot of attention to try to understand what was happening there. And my husband came in one night. He happened to be driving late at night and the radio, and he had Coast to Coast on. Not like he was a regular listener. He just happened to, be dialing across the radio and started hearing this interview with Linda Moulton Howe. And I had no idea who she was, but he came in and he said, there's a woman talking about crop circles on the radio. So he turned it on, and she had a new book out, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2. I ordered the book. The book came. It wasn't about crop circles. The first chapter was all about UFOs, and it was military witnesses, and one of those witnesses was Robert Salas, talking about the deactivation of the nuclear missiles with UFOs hovering over the launch control facility. And I was blown away, and I was so impressed by the credentials of these military witnesses and what they had seen and their testimony about the cover-up as well as what they had seen, that it just blew my mind. And I felt like a door had opened in a wall that I didn't even know was there. Wow.
That's really great. So has any of your family, what do they have to say about your exploring this topic?
They love me, and I think that I have a sister and a brother that are pretty much okay with this. I had an aunt who was outrageously supportive because her brother had been in the Strategic Air Command when everybody on the plane that he was the pilot for had a long-term UFO witness of a UFO flying along the plane. My brother, I think he would still call himself a skeptic. Because of the field that he's in. He's a planetary physicist. He's actually working on the New Horizons project, which was the project that went out to Pluto. Yeah. So in the world that he lives in, which has a very narrow focus, he doesn't. It would not really behoove him at this point to delve too deeply into this, but he pays attention to it. And actually, one of his German colleagues, because he lives in Germany and works for the German government in their space program, was interested enough to read my book, and my brother read it very carefully and was an excellent editor for every little typo that could be found, and actually was very helpful. But I'll tell one quick story. He was also had a project on board the Cassini mission that went to Saturn, and then there was a probe on it called the Huygens probe that went to the moon, Titan.
Mm-hmm.
And his experiment was to measure the wind on Titan.
Wow.
And and they have to, they plan this for, years and years, and then they launch, and then they've got to wait for 7 years and just hope nothing goes wrong. And as they were coming into close proximity, somehow NASA had not managed to turn on the 2 sensors they needed to get the Doppler effect, to get the data. And they were like, no, this can't be happening. But in the end, they were able to get it. He was able to measure the wind speed, and he was interviewed by the San Francisco Chronicle, and he was just jubilant. And he said to them, "This is my salute to the Titans, if they exist." It cracked me up because he was just being funny, but I thought that it reflected to some extent his sister's influence as well.
Yeah. I know just last Monday, NASA had an announcement about geysers on Europa.
Oh, boy.
But it's just they still don't have anything definitive, and they kind of do this thing where they have a quote unquote this big announcement, big press conference, and it's all fascinating. It's interesting. It's very, very cautious, and that's what I see mostly. I'm sure your brother is the same way. Everyone just is very careful. I totally understand. You don't want any news to go out there that can be disproven or anything like that. But I wonder if he would be open-minded enough to speculate that there may be physics out there that we have not thought of that could get someone from there to here. Because I think it's very possibly happening, and I've heard your take on that as well. So that's the one thing that scientists or someone like him have a really hard time with, the energy involved to get from even the nearest star to here or anywhere else in the galaxy or universe. To get to here, it just seems impossible, along with the time that it would take, to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had any of those conversations with him?
That was the first conversation we had, actually, when I first told him that I was going to be writing this book and wanted to talk to him about it. His comment was, well, it's physically impossible. There's no way they could get here from there. And that is oftentimes the pat answer. When I do a talk, I actually spend a little time talking about all of the scientific statements that have been made in the past that turned out to be lacking in humility, shall we say, about the degree to which there are things that we don't know. And so that's one of the things that I like to talk about is there are some amazingly silly things that people have said that that are a little bit laughable now, but
and people have died for those things. There's you look at Galileo under house arrest, the last part of his life, because he was thinking that we revolved around the sun instead of the other way around. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I understand a person of science, like I said, has to be very careful and they have to use logic. But it is interesting to hear someone like you, perhaps not studying the same type of science as your brother, but still you're open-minded enough to really take this topic seriously. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that.
I have that, that side of me. It's an interesting story about my father I could relate to maybe here. But I just wanted to also say I recently sent out to my UFO email list a report on Juno and the Juno mission going to Jupiter and how it was going to be looking at the largest moons and getting more information about them. And I had remembered one of the things I really enjoy doing is reading the books that have been written by people that say that they are contactees. And there's a very interesting book, I think it's called The Invitation by Sixto Paz Wells, in which he says that there is a group of ETs who are resident on Ganymede, which is one of the largest moons of Jupiter, and that there are a number of large cities on that moon. So I just wanted to share that information. You know, those are two very different sources. But I track both of them, maybe because I do have this, you know, sort of double lineage. I'm willing to listen to those sources that claim to be witnesses, that claim to have had contact experiences, but at the same time, I have this science mind that appreciates that kind of an approach as well. And they're two different categories of information, but sometimes they come together in very interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. I've said many times on this show that it's, you know, we may never know the answer, but it's fun to explore the mystery. That's why I'm here every week. And also, there's just so many, I think there's so many things we don't have a clue about, not just this, but just many, many things that we just can't explain or have any clue to what they are. Going back, you just mentioned your mailing list. I'm on your mailing list. Can you tell the listener how they can get on that? Because you send out some really fascinating emails. That's how we reconnected.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you can just email me at joanruthbird@gmail.com, spelled just like it sounds.
Uh-huh. And also, you have a website. I have that all in the show notes, so anyone can check.
That's true, too. Yeah, that's another way that people can contact me. Mm-hmm. I really need to work on getting a better website, but that's one of my goals for the year.
Someone asked we have a message board, and they wanted to know what was the name of that book. I think he's talking about the one that Linda Moulton Howe.
Oh, Linda Moulton Howe has Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2.
No, that's not it. Did you have, and I probably just missed this, a book, Invitation or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, The Invitation by Sixto Paz Wells.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's what they wanted to know.
He's Peruvian. Yeah.
Oh, I got it. Okay. This is the book you were talking about the contactee?
Right. The one that wrote about this group that he called the Rama Mission, that he said that he was working with, and he said that they were actually training and preparing to assist the Earth through a very difficult passage.
Well, yeah. We're doing that now, going through the election.
No kidding.
Sorry, I don't want to ever talk politics, but oh boy.
Yeah.
So anyone who's listening live, you can jump in the chat room and ask our guest a question. Also, if you'd like to call in, we do take calls, and you could call now, or toward the second part of the show would be better, and that number is 603-967-4030. One of the cases I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you've looked deeply into it, and it's in your book, and that's what's called the Montana UFO, the one that's so famous. Can you tell the listener that perhaps is not familiar with that film about it, please?
Yes. That film was taken in 1950 when not a lot of people were carrying around cameras. And it just so happened that Nick Mariana, who was the business manager for a baseball team in Great Falls, Montana, was out looking at the baseball field and looking for the groundskeeper to talk to him about something when he saw these spinning silvery discs come in from the north, hover by a smokestack for the Anaconda Copper Company. He was astonished at what he saw, but he could see two spinning silvery discs, and he happened to always carry a camera in his glove box. So he went dashing for his car, yelled for his secretary to come out and look, grabbed the camera, and started shooting. And my understanding is that when he first started shooting, that the two objects were still very close, and you could still see that they were spinning silvery discs. However, when he gave that film, over to the Air Force and Air Force Intelligence, when they found out about it, they paid him a little visit, and actually there is a letter that's been declassified in the files giving the orders to the intelligence officer to do his best to try to get his hands on that film. And they had it for about 2 weeks, and when they gave it back, Mariana and many of his friends, whom he had shown the film to, said that the best footage had been taken.
Oh.
Nevertheless, the footage that remains, which is at quite a distance, so probably somebody thought that it could be explained away as aircraft. There have been all these analyses done on it, and it's been brought up in all of the government investigations of UFOs, beginning with Project Grudge and Blue Book and the Condon report. And none of them were able to explain it. Project Grudge tried to write it off as planes, but then Ed Ruppel, when he did Blue Book later, he said there's no way it could be planes. He looked into that and dismissed that entirely. And in the end, there was a wonderful study that was published in the Journal of Astronautical Science, I believe it's called, Astronomical Science, by a man named Baker. And what he said was that there was no way it could be planes because he knew how fast our fastest planes were. And even though he couldn't judge the absolute speed of the two silver discs going by, they had relative speed because they could see them going behind the grain elevator and the water tower. So if they knew how far away they were, then they'd be able to figure out what the speed was. Well, he knew that if they were close enough, that the speed that they were traveling at could have been the top speed of the jet aircraft that they had at that time, that they would have had to be close enough that you could tell they were jet aircraft. And the fact that they were these fuzzy balls of light, essentially, in the distance, meant that they were going too fast for them to be any kind of aircraft that we knew about. So it's kind of hard to explain, but it's a very definitive analysis, and I kind of feel like that's the last word on the Mariana UFO film, which anybody can look up. All you have to do is search Montana UFO film or Mariana UFO film, and you can see that film and an excerpt from a wonderful documentary that was done in 1956 just called UFOs.
Yeah, that film, like I said, that's one of the real good ones, and I had no idea that the first part of that film was missing, and what a shame. And just to think that there is somewhere where these films are sitting right now, whether they're preserved, or destroyed. That could be, like for instance, off the California coast when that test missile went up, and there was that thing that went around and zapped it. There's all these films that have been confiscated, and I just wonder where they all are.
Yeah, there are quite a few. When I started looking into it, this was not an isolated case. There were a number of cases where that happened, and the other film that was so interesting to the Robertson panel that Blue Book trotted out as some of their best evidence, the Utah film, the Navy photographer who took that photo, he said that they gave him back a poor copy of it. They did not give him back the original film either. So,
what a surprise! Have you seen? I guess it's the video "A Field Full of Secrets."
I haven't.
You haven't? Oh, okay. There was someone put that up on the message board. I guess it's most likely it's about crop circles. Mm-hmm. And okay, so that case, that's just one of those that it's just too bad you can't see the discs spinning anymore like the original footage. You could, but it's still just a great piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's so rare that someone could actually grab a camera that quickly and get it going.
It's interesting because he was a graduate of the journalism school at the University of Montana. And in Montana, we're very proud of the journalism schools. It was one of the first in the country, and it's still recognized as being one of the best journalism schools anywhere. So they are trained in getting to the truth and being available to report things. And the story goes that he had happened on a train wreck one time when he first got his camera, and then it ended up being on the nightly news. So he always carried it with him ever after that because he never knew when something noteworthy might take place. So there he was.
Yeah.
Johnny ready.
I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Stanford, but he never leaves his house. He's mentioned this to me a bunch of times. Never leaves his house without a camera. And I went, to him to Goddard Space Center and from his house. It's only a few minutes away, and he had his camera with him, always ready. Which I think, and a lot of people have mentioned this, that they didn't even think of taking a film or a picture, and that never crossed my mind when I had my one really good sighting. I'd never even thought of grabbing. I would now. I think I would. Yes, I know I would, for sure.
So many people say that they're just so
mesmerized.
That they don't respond in a normal way.
Right. This question came in from an email from Bill, and he had one about crop circles, but you more or less addressed that. This one is, what can you share about cases of UFOs and nuclear missile silos, especially cases of not just missiles being deactivated, but cases of them being activated both in the former USSR and the U.S.?
Well, those are the most alarming situations, are they not? And there have been a couple of them that I know of, and maybe there are more. But the first one was actually in 1966 at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And we knew about that. We knew that there had been UFOs sighted. We knew that there were technical failures. But what we didn't realize was that they had been put into launch mode, and it was only in 2007 when a witness came forward. I think his name is David Scher, and said, yeah, this is what happened, that they were lit up and they were getting ready for launch mode, and we had to shut them down because we knew that we had not gotten the order to do that. And then the other really famous one is the one that took place in the Ukraine in a town that I can't pronounce, but they said it was south of Kiev. And at that point in time, it was during when the USSR was still intact in 1982, and there were a number of high-ranking Soviet witnesses that after Glasnost came forward, and they actually gave signed testimony about what they had seen and what they had experienced. And I think one of them was a colonel in the Soviet Air Force who was in a launch control facility very similar to Robert Salas when there were all of these UFOs that were being sighted above the ground. Many witnesses were seeing UFO activity zigzagging around like an air show, really, when the dials for the missiles went into launch mode. Now, in 1982, the targets of those missiles, of course, would have been Montana, Washington, D.C., all those places. And many of the witnesses talked about how terrifying it was.
And Montana because of nuclear silos as well?
Right, yeah. We always say, well, the fact that they were trying to hide the nuclear missiles here in Montana just, of course, made us the bullseye for the launch of any Soviet missiles. So, yeah. Anyway, It's all very sobering, and especially now because it seems like, we don't seem to be much better off in terms of nuclear threat than we were then.
No, I don't know what the answer to that. I think the threat is just growing when these threatening countries are getting, closer and closer to developing something. I think it's pretty scary. It's one of those things that can't be undone. It's too bad that the whole nuclear thing could just not be undone and not exist, but it's here, and we have to deal with it. And then, one of the people I had on the show was an astrophysicist, former NASA visiting scientist, who said that his quote that I love, and I've said it a few times on the show, is that if a civilization can get through the bottleneck of technology without blowing themselves up, they'll be traveling the stars. And that's where, we have to get through that bottleneck without blowing ourselves up or destroying ourselves in other ways.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I am very interested in reading the literature from the contactees and from the ETs, and why I was so fascinated by Leo Dvorak and Yuta Wartna, because it seems that the beings that they had contact with did somehow get through that. And so we clearly have things to learn from them. And there is one case, I was just trying to remember what the name of it was. It was part of Wendell Stevens' collection of contact experiences, and it took place in Holland. and there was a businessman that actually, on a boat, he nearly collided with a submersible. I guess what do we call them? Unidentified submersible objects.
Yeah, USO. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. And he ended up writing a book which he published as fiction, although he always claimed that it was not really fiction. And he was, of course, all keen on finding out what kinds of advanced technologies they had. And their response to him was, the last thing that you humans on Earth need is any more advanced technology, that your social systems and your moral behavior are what need to be increased, because you have outstripped your ability to socially accommodate the kinds of powers and weapons that you have developed, and it's a great concern to all of us.
Yeah. It's too bad they don't grow in unison, you know. They just don't. Our social aspects along with our technology. Going back to nukes, because I think that topic's fascinating. I've spoken to Robert Hastings a number of times about this as well. Mm-hmm. What do you think that's all about? That's them. There's many, many cases that have to do with nuclear weapons.
Yes. Well, I tend to agree with Robert Salas. I think that they are just letting us know that this is not the right path. There have been so many cases where they have interfered. I've actually heard some people say, well, maybe for all we know, they've neutralized all of them. You know, I don't know, how do you test to know whether a nuclear missile is still functional? You know?
Whatever you could test, if they have that capability, they could get around the testing. In other words, a false negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, but that tends to be because part of the reason that I think that is probably true is because at the same time, and even earlier before that, we have a number of the contactees telling us that the ETs that they were in communication with were saying that they were trying to talk us out of development of these weapons and trying to see if they couldn't encourage a different direction of development on the planet. So that seems to jive with what it looks like. I mean, they could have done much worse, you know, and now this information has come out about the scientist that has come up with evidence that there may have been nuclear explosions on Mars. You know about that?
I have heard something about that. I haven't looked into it at all. Another interesting take, but I don't know how someone, you know, how did he come up with that? Do you know?
Yes, and you know, I actually, where I heard about this was from Richard O'Connor at the UFO Library, and who meets almost every Tuesday night, and he does a wonderful job of bringing us a lot of the latest information. And he was very impressed by this discovery. And this man actually had a paper that was accepted at a recent, I think of Aeronautics and Astronautics organization that had a recent annual meeting. Mm-hmm. And his paper was somehow analyzing different elements in the atmosphere of Mars and the elements that he was identifying there. And here, you know, I'm not going to be able to remember the name of those, but there were certain isotopes or certain elements that he was finding in the atmosphere that he said could not have gotten there if there had not been nuclear explosions.
I wonder if there's anything that can naturally mimic a nuclear explosion. I know that sounds probably way out there, but you know, I always like to look at what could be a natural cause first before, you know. I kind of like also, I'm not a scientist in any type of way at all, but I do like, you know, to look at all aspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good question, and it's an important question, and I imagine that he has addressed it. I haven't looked at the paper, but I was impressed by the fact that it was accepted.
Really? Wow. Yeah.
At a serious, you know, science
peer
conference.
reviewed. Wow.
Yeah, peer reviewed.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to tell the listener, it's almost at the top of the hour. In hour two, I do want to talk to you about the interview you were involved with the sheriffs in Montana. But are there any other, and maybe the sheriff's is part of this, but is there any other major sighting besides the nuclear silos and also the Montana film that that you can talk about that has happened in Montana that's not so well known, or all the major ones fairly well known?
Well, I mean, I get sighting reports all the time. It's one of the reasons I love traveling around the state to these small rural communities and asking people if they've had sightings and doing my best to take notes and record them. And most of them are lights in the sky, but I have had a number of people that have reported landings. And there are some very interesting sightings that are reported in Mystery Stalks the Prairie, which was Keith Wolverton's book. That was he was the co-author along with Roberta Donovan, and the last couple of chapters. Most of the book is about the cattle mutilations. Not my favorite subject. I thought about doing a chapter on it, but he really covered it well, and that's still an excellent book. And there's a possibility that it may be republished. But I think that you can actually access a copy of it online on Linda Moulton Howe's website. You may have to join her earthfiles.com to get access to it, but she was able to get it put up there. And there are some amazing accounts in there of UFOs as big as hotels landing in pastures out there on the East Rocky Front, not far from Great Falls, not far from the nuclear missiles.
Yeah. Yes, Montana, someone just made we have a listener from Australia on the chat room, just looked at pictures and said Montana looks like such a beautiful place. And it is. I have been through it, and all I can remember from back in the 80s when I went through it was that it's just big open skies and, some beautiful formations. And so in that case, I always think of people that have big open skies must have more sightings, because I'm in the state of Maine. There's a lot of trees. There's a lot of trees right along the East Coast, so a lot of tree cover. But
right.
So would you say that, I don't know how Montana rates as far as sightings go, but would you say there's a good deal of them compared to a lot of the country?
I just don't know how to answer that. I mean, one of the problems in Montana is that we don't have a lot of people. And it seems to be the case that states with larger populations have more sightings. So, there are a lot of different factors that contribute to how many UFOs are seen. But we do have a lot of people in rural areas. It's very much a rural state, and so you have people that are outside a lot, and people that are having to be out at night. So I think that may increase the possibilities. And it does seem like there have been a lot of sightings here. There are sightings going back to cowboy days.
That was one of my questions. I was going to ask you if you were aware of what the earliest sighting was in Montana.
Well, there is this one. I think that was from 1913 or something, from some cowboys way up around Glasgow or somewhere like that. But then there's the very mysterious Cadott Pass report, which might be a meteorite, but are you familiar with that? Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I have not. I'd like to hear about it.
Well, it's a possible UFO crash. And the man who reported it was Jim Lumley, reported it in, I think it was 1865, but I don't hold my feet to the fire on that date. And he had seen it the year before because he was a trapper and was trapping in the headwaters of the Missouri River, he said, in the vicinity of Cadott Pass, whatever the heck that meant. And what he said was that at night he saw this large, brilliant object moving east across the sky that exploded into pieces. And then he heard this crash, and the ground shook and could smell sulfur. And what he said was he wouldn't have thought too much about it. He would just have decided it was a meteorite or something. But the next day, when he went out to check his trap lines, he came across this swath of destruction that was, I think he said, several rods wide. And a rod is 14 feet, as I recall. So we're talking a big swath of destruction. And he followed it until he said he found a stone lodged in the mountain. And he said the stone was compartmented and that there was strange writing on it that looked something like Egyptian hieroglyphs, and that at the base of the stone on the ground there was something that looked like glass and also seemed to be wet.
Wow.
So when you look into meteorites, one of the first things you learn is that meteorites do not ever have holes in them. So when he talked about it having compartments, this is, raises some interesting questions.
Uh-huh.
He said that he thought that the marks on it had to be man-made, that they looked like they had been incised. So sometimes meteorites have strange, funny little marks on them, but he seemed to be convinced that it was some kind of writing. I don't know. He didn't mention the possibility of it being extraterrestrial. He thought it was, there was some human source. And the glass, oftentimes when meteorites hit the ground, you get the formation.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's explainable. The liquid, maybe not so much. So anyway, it's a puzzle. I spent some time kind of combing over the area and trying to figure out from his description where it might be. I've worked a little bit with dowsers. If it's ever going to be found, it would have to be with somebody that has really good intuitive skills, because that area now is, a lot of it is very thickly wooded and has very thick undercover, so that if something were, even if it wasn't completely buried, even if it was above the ground, still being able to see anything would be very difficult. But I think there are probably ways that could be done, and there have been people that have looked for it. Maybe ground-penetrating radar or something like that would enable us to find it. But wouldn't that be fun if we were to find a crashed UFO up at Cadott Pass?
Right. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you want to hear the full show, she does talk about crop circles and other different things that go on in Montana in Hour 2. And for only $2 a month or more, you can support us. And I really appreciate that. This show does cost quite a bit to put on with bandwidth, has its own dedicated server, and other programs that I use to run this show. So if you can help, fine. If you can't, then you can listen live, like I mentioned earlier, for free, the full shows, as well as the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday night from 10 to midnight. Also, you can listen to the whole shows. Thanks a lot. And next week, we have Grant Cameron coming on. And we're booked up. Like I said, we're booked up all the way through November. Have a lot of great guests coming your way. And talk to you next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.